Wondering how you can become better at running your business? Entrepreneurship can be stressful. There's too much to do and not enough time. If you're isolated in your daily decisions, have no fear. Success and balance are possible. Welcome to the Small Business Answer Man podcast, where you master the art of running a successful business using practical advice from experts who want to help you succeed. Now, here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome. We're glad to have you back this week for another great guest. I'm telling you, I told you in this fourth quarter, I was going to set up guests that were going to propel you and help you as you get into 2024. Well, this guest is going to do the same thing. And I'm telling you, the Small Business Answer Man podcast, it's where we help entrepreneurs and business owners find solutions so they don't become overwhelmed and stressed. Now, are you ready to hear about one of those areas of the 6P business owner formula? We may talk about several of them today. Actually, those 6 areas are people, productivity, pricing, promotion, process, and profits. Let's meet our guest today that's going to help share with us what problem will you help solve for our listeners today, Dave?
We're going to figure out how to go from grinding to growing through taking a systems approach, not a symptoms approach, to the business challenges that you face.
Well, that is going to be great. We've got with us Dave Newell, and Dave's mission is to align the misaligned through the 5 Facets of Business framework. And we're going to share that with you today, so stay tuned. And he's a dynamic small business operating system that aligns systems and people so businesses and the people in them can flourish. And I think that's the real challenge, is getting them where they can flourish so they don't feel that overwhelmed and stressed. So David, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to share this, because as I talk about a 6P business owner formula, you have your formula that's there. But let's start back a little bit before we get into that and kind of have you share with how can business leaders go from dealing with symptoms to really a systems approach, because that's a mindset shift as well as a shift in the business that they need to make happen.
Yeah, absolutely. We all face countless challenges in any given week. I mean, you and I were talking a little bit before the show about how we all feel like we don't have enough time on any given day. And if I asked a business leader, what's your biggest obstacle? More often than not, they'll say time, right? And it's a farce, because we all have the same amount of time. It's the priority, it's the diagnostic, it's figuring out what are we doing with our time and where are we leveraging it to be the most productive or to be the most effective or to deliver our mission as best as we possibly can. So to me, really launching in with a systems approach is we often see the symptoms. That's the thing that shows up, right? So we've got frustrated employees. We're having a hard time hiring people. Our internal communication is breaking down. The market's changing. What are we going to do about it? You get all these different things, but those are the outputs. Those are the those are the symptoms that you can see. And when we deal with those alone, all we're doing is putting Band-Aids on challenges, right? And so what we advocate for and what we have some tools and systems around is taking a systems approach. It's to say, look upstream a little bit. What are the elements that are happening in your business that are leading to those symptoms that you're seeing? If you have disgruntled employees or you have internal communication breakdowns, those are the things you can see. But what are the actions or the choices or the systems that are not in place or that are in place that are causing those results? So we really partner with business leaders to simplify and clarify their challenges, and then take a systems approach to ensure that they can solve that problem, not just now, but for the long term.
Yeah, and I think that's so important for business owners to realize, and I love the word you use there, is simplify and clarify, because so many times they're working on the wrong things and they keep getting the same results. And as we're getting ready to go into 2024, I really wanted to share with audiences and with my audiences, what can you do to make some of those changes to really set that alignment up that you have there? And that was going to be really my next question for you, because as we're reviewing some of your information, Dave, you talk about 3 stages of company alignment. And how can leaders use that to understanding really the impact on their business? And let's use this as one of our people out there listening today, Dave. You know they're having this alignment problem, so let's put it in their terms to be able to help them with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three stages are, our mission is to align the misaligned. And what we mean by that is misalignment is when those symptoms start to feel overwhelming, right? So the symptoms we mentioned before start to feel like, all right, like I am struggling. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm getting, the team isn't lined up. The goals aren't lined up. You feel that. We call that misalignment, when your systems and your people are not swimming in the same direction, essentially. Where alignment then is the opposite of that, where it's like we have clarity, we have priority, we have systems, and we have people that are actually executing those priorities and those strategies, and we are aligned in that. And the third stage is what we refer to as realignment. And realignment, so it's misalignment, alignment, and realignment. And what we often underdo is the realignment process. And that's where we start to deal with symptoms, and all we're doing is spinning our wheels and staying stuck in that misaligned space. And that's where we feel like it's a grind. That's where we feel like it's overwhelming. And we often call that stage like hitting your complexity threshold, which means, hey, we've gotten to 3 million, or we've gotten to whatever that number is for you, and we can't figure out how to get to the next level. And often there's a mindset shift in there from what we call kind of the big dog operator mentality, where folks are flying around solving problems, and it's gotten them to the point where their business is sustainable, but only because their effort is there. And when they start to feel that overwhelmed, and they start to feel that frustration or that challenge, and like they just can't get to the next level, it's no longer sustainable, right? And that's where you have to simplify and scale. And so our 5 facet system is really intended to look at 5 core facets of your business, and to frame it and to add execution elements to ensure that all 5 of those systems are moving in the same direction.
Well, I love that, because I know the challenge that people get into, especially this time of the year for entrepreneurs. I've got a group that I've got a mastermind group that I work with.
Yeah.
And I always say from about mid-November to middle of December, you get a little bit in this funk, because what happens is you kind of know this year is kind of set up. You may be in an industry like when I was in the wireless industry, December was a pretty big month, but we knew that was normally going to hit. But the thing that happens is you get into this little bit of funk because you have to go do it again. And when you talk about effort, some of it becomes in, oh my gosh, to be able to get that production again next year, I'm going to have to produce at that same level. And when I mean produce, I mean them as an owner, they're going to have to figure out how do they do it. And I think that creates some of that misalignment you talked about, or maybe they feel a little bit aligned, but what they're really worried about is if we grow like we did last year, oh my gosh, the realignment, we don't have the people in place or the structures in place to be able to get there. And I think this is going to set it up well, because you kind of shared that with your 5 facets of business, and how can small businesses apply that framework to really improve their business, to look at that picture. And what a great time, because it's 2023. So now you can start to decide which ones are not aligned and which ones need to be realigned. So would you share a little with us on the 5 facets of business?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kick this part off, one of the things that, has kind of been floating around in this conversation already is just this idea of prioritizing, right? So we talked a little bit about time. And one of the things that, I used to say is, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. But somebody corrected me and they said, if everything's a priority, then everything's a priority, right? And that's the problem. And so, what we really advocate for, especially in Q4, and I'm finding myself feeling this, like I felt this morning. I didn't execute on a few things I really needed to get done because my head was kind of stuck in, what does 2024 look like for our company? And so I'm feeling the same thing that all these small business owners are feeling, which is, all right, we're kind of wrapping this year, and what do we need to do to actually have a successful and meaningful 2024? And so, we've kind of plugged this already a little bit, but it is assessing, okay, where are we, right? So I like using the analogy of, if you go on a trail, if you go hiking on a trail, or you go to a mall or wherever you go and you look at a map, what's the first thing they tell you? You are here, right? And what we don't often do as business owners or business leaders is take the time to figure out, well, where are we? Right? Like, where are we on the map? We're busy planning our next destination. We're busy planning the roadmap for next year, but we haven't really taken the time to figure out where we are. So what the 5 Facets does is provides you an assessment that's free, that's easy. It takes 5 minutes. It's 26 questions, but it gives you a baseline roadmap for where should we be focusing this year, right? Where are those areas in our business that are dragging us down and keeping us from actually achieving the things that we need, that we desire to achieve? And so the 5 facets of business are culture, strategy, operations, story, and finance. And story is sales and marketing, right? And what we see is that most businesses or most business leaders are good at 2 or 3 of those categories, and the other 2 or 3 drag them down. Right. So they might be culturally really great. It's a fun place to work. It's awesome to be here. They've got a really great story, but man, they're missing deadlines and they're not servicing very well and they're not achieving the results that they could achieve. Right. So the operations takes the rest of the things and causes suffering. Right. So that assessment is really a great way to establish a baseline and to identify, well, what should our priorities be for 2024? Where can we elevate aspects of our business so that the whole thing flourishes? And it's not always fixing everything. Like I said, most businesses are good at 2 or 3 of those categories. And it's the other 2 or 3 that really keep them from achieving what they want to achieve.
Yeah, I think that becomes key. And I love that the way you've got it set up is culture, because that's the people, the organization, the environment that's there, the strategy, how are you going to go out to achieve what you did in 2023? Or if you've got a bigger goal, how are you going to get there? Because none of us want to do exactly what we did last year, because it's going backwards because we know the costs are going to go up. There's the operation side, how important that is to get ourselves set up. And then this story, to be able to tell our story, to be able to make those sales, and then ultimately finances, to be able to take that profit home. Do while you're doing the business, set yourself up for success. And that, I always tell people, you don't want to be a business owner and there's never a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. As a business owner, you put in that sweat, that blood, that equity there to be able to get that pot of gold. And it may be different amounts by what size of business you're at, but you still should be able to receive some profit for your business that's there. So let's break them down, if you don't mind, a little bit on your side of it. And let's talk a little bit about culture. And I shared some things that I believe that it is, but share what you really talk about with them in that culture piece of it.
Yeah. So each of the 5 facets has what we call kind of framing elements and then execution elements. And I think where most business leaders are good is they create some kind of cultural framing document. They may have values, they have a mission statement, they have items like that. And where most fall short is they fail on but how do we operationalize that? How do we integrate that into what we do on a day-to-day basis and ensure that we're not just saying it, but we're also being it? So we create purpose, which is why do we exist? Why are we even a company? What are we doing here? Which other folks call mission. Either word is fine. Purpose. Vision, which is where are we going? We don't add numbers to that here. We say, where is this company trying to go in the long run? And you can add numbers if you like, but we actually do that more in the strategy side of things. But the vision piece, and then we do values plus behaviors. And so values is, well, who are we going to be while we do what we do? Right? That's the who question. But the behaviors are, how do we actually identify controllable actions that make those values true? So example behaviors are, if you receive a complaint, you own the complaint. Right? It means if a customer calls, if you're dealing with something, it's like you receive that, you own it. Right? Because maybe the value is putting the customer first, as an example. It's like, well, that they can own. That's repeatable. That's knowable. It's objective. I can tell whether you did that or not. Right? From the values and behaviors, we move our way down into performance reviews, hiring. We call it a core role chart. How do we actually weave in how do we weave in ownership in our organization in a way that also leverages the values? And so we want to make sure that the culture bucket isn't just, hey, this is who we say we are, but it doesn't have any fidelity, because when you engage with us, Pete over here isn't actually acting that way and we're okay with it. It's fine. That's just Pete. It's like, no, that's not okay. That means that your culture is no longer true. So you have to be able to operationalize culture as well. And so each of the 5 facets has a design element and it has an implementation element.
I love that setup because the culture becomes so important. It becomes kind of the foundational component. I'm sure why you put it first there, because if you don't have that, and so many business owners, we're getting the end of the year. And to be quite honest, most of them are very giving. So at the end of the year, maybe they want to do bonuses. I used to do those in my business, and you do business and you feel really good about that. And then you find out about 30 days later, that's all gone. And you're wondering, wow, I didn't really get the collateral, the advantage of that I really wanted to. And it's because some of these things you talked about, those vision, that values, the behaviors that you want, are you creating that? Can you set something up instead of behaviors that causes that? And they know if they're winning or losing. And they're able to keep that scoreboard that's there. So I love that philosophy that you've got there.
And maybe if I can just add one more piece,
Sure.
sorry. One more piece I'd add to that is, you talked about incentivizing, right? Like an end of the year bonus, when it's like, there's really 2 kinds of contracts that you enter into when you enter into engagement with your employees. You enter into market contract, which is I'm going to pay you, I'm going to offer you benefits, those types of things, but you also enter into a social contract. And the social contract actually has more leverage and power than the market contract does. Because the social contract is about meaning, it's about relationship, it's about connection, it's about fitting in. And if you underdo the social contract, the market contract becomes the focus. And that's when people say things like, hey, I'm not getting paid enough. Or I don't really like doing this task. I don't think I'm going to do it anymore. Or they quiet quit, or all these different things that show up. It's generally a symptom of underdoing the meaning making of a social contract in an organization. So I love what you just said, because I really do think that part, like the end of the year bonus, doesn't carry the weight of a, what we call like a values shout out, right? Which is like, hey, I want to acknowledge this person for exhibiting, what our company's all about. Like that has lasting power.
Yeah, I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. We probably won't get to all 5. So my strategy, I think they kind of know what that is, because you and I both love to talk and time wise. But let's talk a little bit about that operational piece, because I do see that as a challenge. And of course, I know you worked with enough small businesses, and I have too. And even in my small business, it's tough. There's only 3 of us, and it's tough to have that operational issue. And we're seeing that now because we're turning some things over to a VA unit. And operation wise, things we took for granted because they were up in our head no longer can be. And as you grow an organization, that becomes a challenge. So I'm curious if you don't mind sharing a little bit about operations.
Yeah, operations, the high level framing elements of operations are really getting clear on the core business, right? The core business, honestly, it's amazing how many people have taken our assessment and how low the score tends to be on the question about, do you understand what your core business is? Often it's a 3 out of 5 or a 2 out of 5. Folks are like, no, it's a little bit complicated. It's like, this is the most central thing that you have. If you're not clear on it, I guarantee you your customers aren't, right? So this is a really central piece. So we get really clear on, what are you actually selling? What are you actually doing? And that could be a product or a service, but what is it, right? And let's create a clear, here's the 3 steps to engage with the small business answer man, right? Here's the 3 steps to do this. You have to have that clarity. So it starts with core business. Process documentation is a really important part of that, and not documenting everything. Like that's an impossible task. I think sometimes that turns into a distraction for folks, is we're just trying to document everything. It's like, no, don't worry about everything. Just do the ones that matter the most, that your entire team needs to have at least an 80% understanding or a 20% understanding of, right? Like, what are those core pieces? And then we actually start to transition the mentality into, how do we actually share information across the organization? So one of our operational pieces is actually what we refer to as the rhythm of the business. And the rhythm of the business is how, like, what is the weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual meeting structure that allows our organization to share information effectively and to solve problems in a timely manner. So we really are thoughtful about how we design the meeting flow of an organization, because, as you know, I'm sure you hear this all the time. People are like, I hate meetings. I don't know why we do meetings. It's like, well, it's because there probably wasn't a lot of intention. It was just, oh, maybe we should have a meeting about this. And that was 7 years ago. And now it's still a meeting. And people are like, why are we having this meeting? I don't know why we're talking about this. It's like, well, we just lost the intention. So we also then provide what we call impact meetings, which is a framework for how to have meetings that are effective. So impact stands for internal meetings with purpose and action. And so we make sure that every meeting is outcomes and issues based and ends in action steps. And then the last piece of operations is what we call story solving. It's essentially, here's a formula or a process for how to solve the most complex issues that you're facing in your business, which again kind of directs towards systems, not symptoms.
Yeah, I love that, because I tell you, especially when you're talking about meetings and communication, because when you do a culture survey or an organizational survey, number one thing that you'll see normally rated the lowest is what? The communication that staff gets. And the problem is sometimes as ownership or leadership, we're like surprised. We're communicating all the time, but are we communicating the right things and at the right time? And the thing is, are we following that up with some regularity that really allows us to get that message out? So I love that you share that. Let's talk just a little bit, if you don't mind. Don't want to, stories very important, and sales is vital for an organization, but I think that finance piece, because like I told you earlier and said, I want them business owners to get to the end of the rainbow and there be a pot of gold there. And finances, it's more than just about what the profit is, but that's the reason we're doing business. We're not we're not nonprofit organizations. We're for profit. And when you have profit, the thing is, you help your community thrive and you have the livelihoods. If it's 10, 15, 20, 100, whatever that number is of people that you're giving a livelihood to. So it becomes so important. So would you share a little bit about that, if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. And, in the finance bucket was the last addition for us, in part because it's not, where my background or training is, right? And I'm not pretending to be a CPA. I'm not pretending to be a CFO of any kind. But what we've identified is there's essential practices that most business leaders, if you just put these basic practices in place, it can transform the way you think about and operate in your finances in a really meaningful way. As you stated, I think most of us got into business for ourselves or took over a business because we thought, oh man, I can control my time and think about all the money I can make. And what it often turns into is, oh man, are we going to make payroll this month? Right? Or how are we going to have a 2024 like we did a 2023? And you get stressed about those finances. And there's 5 things, but there's 2 things that I think are super important on the financial side that I think are underdone. And one is planning for profit. And so there's a really great book by Mike Michalowicz. It's called The Profit Plan. And so we leverage that knowledge. It's an amazing book. It's super helpful, and it's actually a pretty simple idea. And the idea is, instead of thinking income minus expenses equals profit, it's income minus profit equals expenses. And that sounds really basic and really easy, but it's really difficult in practice. And it requires an intentional thought around what is our profit design? And so we work with organizations, we work with small businesses to think about, okay, well, what is the profit percentage we want to get to and how do we get there? And the second practice is really the act of forecasting. And forecasting is challenging, right? Because there's a lot of unpredictability in certain industries, service industries, product, et cetera. Like, it's hard to know what 2024 is going to look like or what 9 months from now is going to look like. I think if COVID taught us anything, it's predicting the future is really, really difficult, right? But the act of forecasting prepares you for potential decisions you're going to have to make down the line. Meaning, well, are we going to hire somebody? Well, let's forecast, right? 6 months from now, here's best case scenario, here's most likely, and here's worst case scenario. And what are we going to do in any one of those categories, right? But just the act of forecasting out 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the line, here's what we anticipate we're going to be at, just gives you some kind of forward thinking in your decision making, so that when those situations arise, you're not as rattled by it, or you're not as reactive, right? And you can be a little bit more strategic and logical.
Well, I tell you, I think you're right on to it. And I love that planning for profit, to get them set up, thinking about that. And then with forecasting, really seeing what is 2024 going to be. You've got time to do that yet. And the other thing it does is planning for profit. It helps you realize, okay, what do you need to do this year? We've all heard the saying, cash is king. We know taxes are going to come up April 15th next year.
Yeah.
We know some of those things. But the thing is, I see business owners all the time make these mistakes as they go out and buy that brand new truck. And their other truck's less than 2 years old. And the only person that wins, they don't save any taxes. They actually give extra money to the dealership, because the dealership is tickled to death that they're coming in 2 years and they're the ones making the profit. So you're helping their bottom line. I'm not telling you not to buy a truck, but do you need that truck? Is it really saving you taxes?
Yeah.
If it saves you 30% in taxes, but you lose 50% of value, some people would say that's crazy. So think about what you're doing. And that's what we're saying about in the finance area. Boy, Dave, this has been some great information. I'm so glad I had you on for this fourth quarter and this month of December, because to get our business owners to think. And I think you've got a couple gifts that you're willing to give our owners. And we've talked about that assessment multiple times. And I'll be honest, I'm going to go check it out myself and take the assessment for my small little business. But would you share with them how they can take the 5-minute assessment?
Yeah. So if you go to fivefacets.biz, .biz. If you go to fivefacets.biz, it's the first link on the page. Take the free assessment. It's 26 questions. You get an automatic results page. And so what you'll see is kind of your score in each of the 5 facets. So culture, strategy, operations, story, and finance. And what it'll do is it'll give you a quick snapshot of where are we healthy and where can we focus. Right. And if you want to follow that up, we do a free 30-minute consultation on your assessment results. There's no strings attached. I know as a consultant, I have to say that it's free, because everybody assumes everything with consulting is expensive. It's not. It's free. The assessment is free. The 30-minute review is free. So any listener of this podcast, by all means, sign up for that 30-minute meeting. Happy to have that conversation, kind of talk through, here's some things we think you could do in 2024. And lastly, we do have some live workshops coming up in January, February, or March of next year. And for anybody who's listening to this podcast, if you go to the fivefacets.biz, you'll see workshops on the top. If you click that button, anybody who's here gets 25% off. All you have to do is type in podcast 25 at checkout, and you'll get the 25% discount on any live workshop if that's something you want to join for next year.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with our audiences, and we'll have all that because we know the people here are very busy. So we're going to have it quick and easy for you to click on the show notes. Just go to smallbusinessanswerman.biz and you'll see all the information right there. Or just most of you are on your phone right now. It's in show notes. So just go to show notes. You're going to be able to press the button to be able to find all that information that's right there available to them. Dave, before I let you go, I ask every guest this same question. What would be your best business advice you would give the business owners?
Yeah, as you think about 2024, as you think about the continued growth for your business, it's to get really, really clear on what is our core business and how are we telling our customers about it. When you have alignment between this is what we do on a regular basis. So for us, it's the implementation of the 5 facets. We know what that is. We know what the 5 facets are. We know what the process is for implementation, and getting really clear about what do we actually do and how are we presenting that to our customers, and do those two things have fidelity? And if those two things have fidelity, you're creating clarity with your customers, not confusion. And as we know, a confused mind doesn't buy. So the more clear you can be about this is what we do, and this is the problem that we solve, and this is how we bring it to you, you're really solving all the problems in their brain for them to say yes to you.
Well, thanks for sharing, Dave. And I truly appreciate you taking the time out to be on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. You asked great questions. I appreciate the energy and insights. Thanks for letting me join you.
Well, folks, I tell you, business owners, maybe you're still in that funk. But what I want to tell you is by listening to this podcast, number one, share it if you know someone that it would be beneficial for, but you may want to go back and re-listen to it. And then I would tell you, go take the assessment. Dave's giving you an opportunity to get a look at your company in those 5 areas of culture, strategy, operations, story, and finance, and really get a real good indication. And then sit down with your team. Most of you are probably going to still work the week after Christmas. So why don't you set a team meeting there with your leadership team and really strategize what you need to do? And maybe it's listening to one of his upcoming workshops, getting signed up for that, but decide what it is for you. But let's do something. Let's take action. So my action this time is just take the 5-minute assessment, get the report on your company, and be honest with yourself, and then decide what needs to be changed. Not everything, but what's the first thing that you're going to change to make that, to be able to get the result that you want in 2024. Our goal on this podcast is to help small business owners succeed, but also thrive and not be overwhelmed and stressed. So I appreciate you joining me today. Come back next week. All of our information will be in show notes. Those links to be able to get to the assessment, all the information Dave shared with us are in the show notes. So please check those out. And again, Dave's on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with him on LinkedIn, we'll have that on the show notes also. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you back here next week for another great podcast. Make it a great day.
That's all the time we have for this week. To continue your journey, head over to smallbusinessanswerman.biz to access the tools and resources mentioned in today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who would benefit from listening. That's smallbusinessanswerman.biz. Until next time, remember, when you find the right solutions, your business grows and you get your time back.